Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Hello everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett and thank you for joining us today on Market Journal. This week we're going to be taking a look at how researchers at the University of Nebraska Lincoln are hoping to assist producers of the future with new innovations in robotics. Plus, we've got the latest when it comes to the markets and weather, as well as a fresh crop talk segment. We will get to all of that coming up here in a moment, but first. As we mentioned last week, we were recently out in the Pacific Northwest to take in the sights and sounds of the wheat export and marketing workshop, which was hosted by the Wheat Marketing Center in Portland, Oregon. The two-day event was chock full of lessons and experiences, and those in attendance came away from their time there with a fresh appreciation for the many facets of wheat marketing and exporting. From the Wheat Marketing Center to a USDA inspection facility and shipping ports, there was a lot to fit in for the 2 days of excursions through and around Portland. Participants of this year's workshop agreed that it was not only a fun experience, but also highly educational. That educational aspect is what makes organizing trips like this important to the folks at the Nebraska Wheat Board.
So the Nebraska Wheat Board likes to send out these people to this trip, whether it's a new hire like myself or Taylor or a new board member, producer, anybody, so they can see what happens with wheat once it leaves the farm or the elevator and kind of give like a full perspective of what Nebraska wheat's really doing on a larger scale.
One of the participants of the workshop was Colby Reason. Colby shared his top highlights of the trip with us as we wrapped up our final day in Portland.
Really enjoyed the Marseille baking company this morning. We ate very well. I always enjoy that. I moved on to that United Grain Terminal. Really got a kick out of that. 1930s built elevator on half of it. Kind of reminds me of home, but it has also been updated and is very impressive what they can do with that place and what everybody does down this up and down this river. But saw them loading a barge today, 2.2 million bushels, 7 to 8 trains. I just thoroughly enjoyed that.
Beyond these new and exciting experiences, as a grain merchandiser with Farmers Cooperative in Hemingford, Nebraska, Colby also found a new appreciation for many of the global importers of U.S. wheat.
Ship a lot of our wheat this way, it seems. Didn't realize the importance that this outreach program has to this Southeast Asia region. I don't know that I appreciated those customers enough before this trip, and it's very interesting to see how much thought is put into what these end users or where these customers are at and what their preferences are.
Another participant of the workshop was Doug Carlson. As a wheat producer from Chapel, Nebraska, he was very appreciative of the many educational aspects of the tour, and he said he was impressed with the research and development that takes place at the Wheat Marketing Center.
And it went from far above my head down at the analytical lab that we ended up at. That was very technical, and getting down to like the commercial bakery, that was very interesting. I liked the guy that ran the place. You could tell he was very passionate about his job, and I appreciated that he had some older equipment in there that was obviously loved and maintained well and worked perfectly, so I liked that. And I liked the lab at the first facility there, where they just mix different grades of wheat to do different things. I'm not really a baker myself, but I still could appreciate the nuances, I guess, of making different things. And then of course the production line was interesting. But yeah, I mean, it's always good to see the numbers where my product's going, and it's interesting to see how it can be mixed with wheat produced in other parts of the country to meet the desires of the buyer overseas.
The Nebraska Wheat Board's mission is to increase both domestic and foreign consumption of wheat and wheat food products through marketing and research, while also developing and maintaining both domestic and international export markets for Nebraska wheat producers. While this workshop was enjoyable for all who attended, the lessons learned at this event will also be invaluable for all those who participated. Thanks to those participants for giving us some of their feedback on their experience. In the coming weeks, we'll have more content from this journey to share with you. That includes an in-depth look at the grain exporting at United Grain. We'll also take you to a Portland wholesale bakery that's turning raw ag commodities into delicious value-added products. Up next, over the past few years, a team at the University of Nebraska Lincoln has been working on a new piece of technology that's geared toward making field maintenance much easier. Their solution is the innovation that they're calling the FlexRow. This unmanned ground vehicle can distribute seeds, chemicals, and fertilizers. For more on this story, we return to Market Journal's Mike Straub.
UNL plant scientists and biological systems engineers have been working together to build what is known as FlexRow, short for Flexible Robot. The autonomous multi-purpose platform hit the field for the first time this summer for demonstration at Roger Memorial Farm.
We have a multi-purpose robotic platform called FlexRow, and like I said, it's multi-purpose, so we could do planting, we could do phenotyping, and also spraying. So at Rogers Memorial Farm, we kind of demonstrated how our planter row units work.
FlexRow is an important robotic tool that can perform targeted operations while saving cost and implementing climate-smart agriculture. Spraying and fertilizer application are currently being tested.
We are going towards climate-smart agriculture, which is really important, and robotic tools and technology tools have a big role to play. So we see FlexRow as one of those important robotic tools that can do very precise operations in the field while saving costs. If you think about targeted spraying, so only spray where things are needed instead of spraying throughout the field. Fertilizer application is another one we're exploring, where can we do very targeted fertilizer application.
The FlexRow is intended for multi-purposes and is built to be modular. It can collect data through onboard sensors used to measure such things as reflectance, plant height, temperature, and humidity.
When we started, our goal was how can we develop a field usable robotic platform that is modular, but also it should have the ability to do multiple operations. So we have 6 computers on this machine that exchange information, or a network called CAN bus, so that we can do very precise operations. And also we're using different camera technologies to look at green pixel fraction, which is basically in an image how much greenness is there. We're using spectrometers that tells us nutrient deficiencies. So there's a lot of sensor technologies that we're using, and using all that information to make decisions so that we can very precisely do site-specific management.
While someday the FlexRow could be a part of everyday use for farmers and producers, developing farmer-friendly robotic solutions that are easy to use involves a lot of obstacles.
This is a research prototype, so taking this to an actual product that farmers can actually use is a big hurdle, So how do you make a product out of a prototype, right? So that's very important, So exploring if some of my students, they want to do this as a startup company, that is one way to do it. Take the intellectual property we developed and make it into a company. So that's one avenue. I think the important point is how can we develop farmer-friendly robotic solutions is what is important. How can we give a system to a farmer that is not too complex, and it is easy to use. So there's a lot of thought that needs to go into it.
Modular technological tools are important when focusing on climate-smart agricultural practices. The end goal of a product like this is applying less in the field while producing more.
For climate-smart agriculture practices, it is very important to have modular technology tools, and especially robotics, automation, artificial intelligence. All of these need to be combined, brought together in a very synergistic way so that we can actually create very functional systems that will help us with the goal of how do we apply less in the field but produce more, without affecting the environment in a negative way.
FlexRoll could be a product which, in the future, could aid researchers with a few acres of plots to farmers with thousands of acres. Before this can happen, however, there are some hurdles to overcome. More real field testing needs to be done before the next steps can be taken. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Mike Straub.
Thanks for that story, Mike. If you'd like to learn more about the FlexRow and its development, you can find a link along with this story. We posted that at the Market Journal website. What is that time of the show where we like to turn our attention now to the grain markets? This week we had a chance to catch up with author and analyst Elaine Kub. Here's our conversation from Wednesday afternoon. Well, let's talk about these markets. Corn, soybeans, wheat. We've got some storylines developing in all three of those markets. But big picture, what are you seeing here as we almost get ready to round out the month of January?
I see them being, kind of magically calm. When you think of this time of year, this should be the time of year when you see volatility from South American weather. And we do on a day-to-day basis, we do see that's what's driving corn and soybeans particularly. However, on a longer term, we really haven't changed the price level of corn or soybeans or even wheat since the beginning of the year. We had some reaction to a rather bullish USDA report a couple of weeks ago, but nothing that's changed the momentum or added any real directional momentum to these markets or made them trade out of already tested trading ranges. So I think it's kind of suspiciously calm, and it makes me wonder, what's coming down the pipeline in February or beyond that might actually add some direction to them.
Yeah, no kidding about that. I want to ask you about South American weather here in a second, but is there a storyline worth following right now that's impacting the wheat market?
The season is just, how much you can get shipped out the door exports wise. But other than that, you look at all of the northern hemisphere wheat growing areas and their expectations for how much fertilizer or yield might be perspective in 2023. It's almost exactly like we had about 11 months ago when the Russian war in Ukraine started. These are the same stories that we worry about now, is what the Black Sea region can do for planted acreage in a war scenario where about 22% of their wheat fields in Ukraine are now behind the front line. That will change, what will happen in their 2023 production.
Yep. All right, I promised we'd go back to South American weather. Let's do so here. What are you tracking down there? What are you seeing for some storylines developing?
Well, it's a record large crop in Brazil. So on that sense, in 6 months or so, the world will have more soybeans and a less tight soybean scenario than we're experiencing right now for folks that are buying soybeans in the global market. However, on the day-to-day basis, as I mentioned, the weather forecasts that drive prices, it's based on the drought in Argentina, which is slowing down the planting progress, and for their corn also. So that's really where the bullishness would come from on any day-to-day basis, is the dry weather that's in the lingering La Nina from Argentina versus that record large crop coming out of Brazil.
You mentioned we're kind of stuck in this pattern. It's been a bit of a quiet January. Maybe you're hinting at we might see something bigger happen for the month of February. Is your sense that prices are more so likely to go down than up at this point, or what are you thinking, Elaine?
I think when you think about setting prices for the 2023 crop, when we talk about what might happen for that crop, I think you have to be leaning towards them coming back down eventually. The commodity markets are always going to move back down toward the cost of production. But in the near term, the old crop grain markets, I think there is potential for some bullish movement as we get, the Chinese consumers coming back to work and back home after their Lunar New Year holiday. We might see a boost in consumption in China and elsewhere in Asia and globally, and a confirmation that we're not experiencing a recession globally, or that we might be able to come out of these inflation concerns in a positive way. I believe there's chances for oil, for instance, to start coming up. And if that starts moving up, you get a lot of other commodity markets following that higher, certainly including ethanol, biofuels, and corn and soybeans and wheat, anything that a grocery consumer will go to the grocery store and still be paying for despite these inflated prices.
Mm-hmm. Well, Elaine, is it ever too early to talk about acreage for what's going to come this spring? And if not, I guess tell me some of your thoughts around that. I know you've been looking at different prices when it comes to natural gas and fertilizer.
Yeah, I mean, the official battle for acreage sort of happens in February when the crop insurance reference prices are set. But the University of Nebraska, for instance, Glennis McClure has already come out with the crop budgets that they anticipate for 2023, looking at fertilizer prices as they are now, that's the tricky part is you're certainly going to favor soybeans or any crop that doesn't require a lot of fertilizer from a planted acreage perspective if you're using fertilizer prices that we saw last fall or even right now. But if you have an expectation that fertilizer prices might continue to come back down, to diminish, to slacken, because we've seen a mild winter in Europe and natural gas prices are notoriously volatile, if that can come back down, then corn is right there in that mix too. And so at this point, sure, it's a little too early to tell, but if you had to guess one way or the other, I'd guess a 50-50 split between corn and soybeans, or just a natural pattern that we see from year to year.
Yeah, that's a story we'll definitely be following closely over the next month or so. Elaine, at this point, we're closer to February 1st than we are January 1st, which is typically the time people like to make New Year's resolutions. As we entered into this new year, you had a chance to sit down and write some thoughts about New Year's resolutions when it comes to grain marketing. What advice do you want to share with those marketing grain and perhaps some areas they can improve on?
I mean, it's like making any New Year's resolution. You can't be vague. You have to be specific or be measurable. So the one tricky thing that I know folks sometimes like to do is you put a price target. You want to say, I want to sell corn at $7, for instance. But if you make it that specific, that measurable, it may never come to pass. We talked about the new crop markets may be biased towards moving back down toward the cost of production, and we may never see the highs from last summer again. So in my mind, the specific things that you can do, that you can control, is to have a schedule, say that you want to have 20% sold by a certain date or 30% sold by a certain date. That gives you some accountability to keep things moving through the year, but not to pin your heart on something that may never come to pass.
Yeah, some good advice there, Elaine. Before I let you go, applying that advice to where we're at now, what do you want to leave our viewers with? Any risk management advice or final thoughts?
Well, in a relatively quiet market scenario, I don't think there's a lot of action that folks need to be taking immediately right now. I think particularly those who are still owning old crop grain have an opportunity to kind of wait and see what the rest of the commodity market or the outside markets do. Maybe they'll give you a little boost right now. But be thinking longer term down the line for the next couple of months. This is definitely the season to be making new crop hedging sales.
Author and analyst Elaine Kub, our guest this week. Elaine, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Next week, we'll be joined by Todd Holtman from DTN. If you have a question you'd like for me to ask Todd, be sure to email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll be sure to pass your question along. Veterinarian Eric Knott of Miller, South Dakota, has been working with cattle throughout his entire career. But last September, in spite of safety precautions, his head was caught between the processing chute frame and the squeeze as the bull was released. It was a freak accident, but one that left him with a fair share of scars. Today, he is back working at his practice, but he shares his insights into avoiding those pinch points when working with cattle in the January issue of the Nebraska Farmer. Well, it's now time to catch up on weather with Market Journal weather analyst Bill Boyer. Bill, as we get ready to round out the month of January, what should we expect in the next week?
Well, more of the same. Winter, that's what we have more of coming this next week, Bryce. Cold conditions, we're going to remain cold out here through the next several days. In fact, this goes into early next week. Below normal temperatures are going to hold on. And as we go into the week after that, our 8 to 14 day outlook calls for more winter, basically, with a good chance of below normal temperatures here across the region. I know we're not far off from Groundhog Day. Let's hope we don't have a lot more winter coming. People are getting pretty sick of it, and we have a very good solid snow cover out there across the region. We need some precip. That's definitely in the still need more to alleviate our drought concerns. We still have drought conditions across a large portion of the area. As you can see, still exceptionally extreme drought conditions out there. Those are easing somewhat, and the snow's helping with that, and we've got more coming. Snow ongoing this morning, especially across the northern half of the state. That system's going to slowly push away, but notice the western half of Nebraska through Sunday and even into Monday, going to continue to see some more snow out there, light to moderate snow. A storm system looks like it's going to track to the south of us as we go Monday into Tuesday, bringing in some very good moisture. This part of the country really going to do well with moisture. Meanwhile, we just have quieter conditions, but remaining cold here across the region for most of the rest of the week after we get through today and the first couple of days of the week. and then maybe as we get towards next weekend, bringing another system in closer to the region. So all in all, it's going to be wintry, and temperatures are going to look that way. Today we're much colder. We've got highs, generally speaking, in the 20s and 30s across the state. Those are replaced tomorrow with single digits in teens and a few 20s. We'll remain cold into Monday. Then we start to slowly moderate. Tuesday, get back into the 20s. Wednesday as well, 20s, maybe some 30s to near 40 sneaking in the southeastern portion of the state. And then a couple of days, maybe a little bit more warm up Thursday into Friday as we start to retreat that cold air a little bit. Generally speaking, though, we're going to remain cold out here across the region. Precip-wise, I told you, very heavy moisture in Tennessee, in the Tennessee Valley there. We have a decent shot of getting some accumulating moisture, and it's going to be in the form of snow in our areas. Again, a few inches, light to moderate accumulations by the time you add the next 3 or 4 days up off to the west in the western half of the state. So more winter, that's what's coming our way, colder than normal temperatures, and some chances of snow through the first couple, 3 days of this week. And next week also looks cold across the area.
Thank you very much for that update, Bill. Finally, today we have a new Crop Talk segment to share with you. Last month wrapped up a series of workshops known as Confronting Cropping Challenges. This workshop series gave Nebraska producers the opportunity to learn from cropping issues that impacted growers during the 2022 growing season. Market Journal's Bill Dodd brings us this story.
Just make sure that we have everything set up correctly.
From late November to mid-December, Nebraska Extension hosted a number of workshops titled Confronting Cropping Challenges. Program topics ranged from combating tar spot to managing nutrient and herbicide carryover from the drought conditions many producers have been dealing with.
Well, it would be nice if we could get caught up a little bit and get out of this drought situation. We've got a long ways to go, but we also need to keep in mind that with that there could be nitrogen losses through leaching as well. We just need to keep an eye on that. Your yields are likely to be lower, especially in dryland situations, and if your yields are lower, it makes sense that you would have less nitrogen uptake and less uptake of other crops as well. But for nitrogen, it's important to soil test and get a for sure feel for what you have, but you also need to keep into consideration that if we get moisture, which I hope we do before this spring, that a lot of that could be lost, so it's better to soil test in the spring to get a feel for what you have there. So things to think about if we do have nitrogen in the soil for next spring is that we can use that for a corn crop next year. And the important thing is to just keep in mind that it may be a good idea to apply a little bit less up front if you side dress applications, and then monitor your crop and apply a little bit more later on.
Drift is another issue that many producers have dealt with in past seasons, and an issue that many extension educators receive questions about on an annual basis. However, it's difficult to know if chemical drift is impacting your crop before you have it tested. In any case, the most important thing you can do to help avoid drift is to follow your labels to the T.
Every season, somebody will come with either a plant of some sort, it could be a tree or vegetable crop. They say, oh, the leaves are curling, and it must be a drift from, some chemical that was sprayed. But curling of a plant's leaf can happen due to various, things. It could be drought, it could be disease, it could be temperature, and of course it could be chemical. So until you send it and have it diagnosed, it's very hard to tell whether that curling is caused by a drift or not. So in general, drift happens because people go out and spray without following the label on the chemical. The chemical that you buy and spray usually has what we call a label, and the label tells you what the threshold temperature might be, because some chemicals will volatilize above that temperature. Some chemicals have a threshold of wind above which you shouldn't spray. Sometimes when it's very calm, we think that's an ideal time to go out and spray. And actually, if the wind speed drops below 3 miles per hour, when it's really very calm, So there is a probability of what we call temperature inversion. When there is an inversion, that means there's no mixing. The chemical will just stay suspended in air, so the slightest wind will carry it away. A 3-mile-per-hour wind probably can carry that thing 3 miles away in just an hour.
As herbicides, pesticides, and other chemicals continue to rise in cost, another thing producers may need to consider as they gear up for spring is calibrating their sprayer in order to ensure proper, uniform application during the spraying process.
So when it comes to calibrating your sprayer, you should definitely do it at the very beginning of the season, at a minimum. So usually we recommend having new tips, or at least inspecting the spray tips that are on that sprayer, making sure that everything is set up correctly, doing a few testing with flow rates. But a lot of those new sprayers have rate controllers that you can help kind of automate that calibration process. But at the beginning of the season, for sure. And then as you go through the season, there are some other cases where you might consider recalibrating. If you're going to be using a new product, if you're going to be spraying a different crop, if there's something else that looks weird on your machine, or if you end up having to replace your spray tips mid-season or during the spray season, those are cases where we would recommend that you recalibrate and just make sure that everything is fine.
As every planting and growing season comes with its own set of challenges when it comes to crop production, following these tips could help you confront some of the challenges that many producers have faced in 2022. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
All right, thank you very much for that information, Bill. Now, if you'd like to learn any more about this topic and some of those other topics covered at the workshop, you can find all the information and more that you're looking for. You know the website, we mention it all the time. It's cropwatch.unl.edu. Well, that is going to do it for this week's show. Be sure you're tuned in to Market Journal next week as we bring you a special edition of the show from this year's Cattle Industry Convention. This year's event will be taking place down in New Orleans. Until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.